Hey folks, Technovoid back here with more of that good old Hollow Knight content. This game, it's a damn masterpiece, and if you haven't played it yet, here's a few tips. First off, you should definitely go do that. It's one of the best, if not the best, Metroidvania ever. Number 2, you should probably click off this video now, because we're entering spoiler territory. This wonderful game succeeds on so many fronts. Whether it be the beautiful art style, the sprawling world, the colorful enemies and NPCs, or the immense amounts of content for exploration, Hollow Knight's firing on all cylinders. But if there's one thing that really makes this game tick, it's the myriad of interesting bosses. These foes take your combat, platforming, and pattern recognition skills to the limit, with tons of dangerous foes who will turn you into a shade faster than you can say Shaw. And yeah, Hollow Knight's a tough game. Some of these baddies are as unforgiving as they are spectacular, and you might find yourself respawning at a bench pretty frequently. The final update to the game, Godmaster, introduced among other things, the Hall of Gods, a location where you can fight any previously fought foe at any time, either on their in-game difficulty, a harder version with increased health, damage, and potential layout changes, and a version of that harder mode that makes you die in one hit. No exceptions. This mode takes all the bells and whistles of the rest of the game off and really gives players a chance to master these fights outside of their single story appearance. And while some of these bosses are the gift that keeps on giving, some are admittedly less impressive on repeat trials. With the impending release of Silksong, and my channel somewhat recently hitting 500 subscribers, I'm gonna pretend like this video has to do with either of those things, instead of a video that I put on the back burner for like a year, because it was taking a really long time to make and I had so many other things to do. Speaking of subscribing, only about 13% of viewers are subbed, and doing that really helps my content reach more people, so please consider hitting the subscribe button if you like this video. Anyway, Silksong hype, 500 subs, Hollow Knight, boss ranking, and analysis. Let's go! I will be ranking every boss in this game on 2 scales, their difficulty and their fun factor. Both of these ratings will be decided on a scale from 0 to 5, with their overall ranking based on a combination of the two. The ratings will be primarily decided on the Ascended setting in Godhome, meaning some fights will be noticeably different from their story counterparts. However, a boss's place in the main game will be considered and mentioned where relevant. Obviously, a good deal of this list will be opinion-based, as different people have trouble with different bosses, and some might find certain fights to be more enjoyable than others, so please let me know your opinions in the comments, and understand that these are just my personal thoughts and ramblings on a game, having played it a whole lot. Like a whole lot. More than is probably healthy. Let's get into it! Number 46. Massive Moss Charger. Difficulty, 0. Fun factor, 0. Hey y'all, does this even count? The Massive Moss Charger comes in at the bottom of this list because I'm not even sure if this thing can be considered a full-on boss. It does get a statue in the Hall of Gods, so I guess? There's really nothing to this fight though. You can defeat this enemy without moving an inch just by pressing the attack key in a rhythm that continually knocks the big bush back. The only way you can possibly get hit during this fight is if the boss starts with a jump instead of a dash, and even then the animation is so long that you can easily get out of the way and prepare to nail spam to victory. It's kinda sad, but the regular Moss Chargers are probably more difficult than this variant. At the very least, you need to chase them to do any real damage, which, at least requires the movement keys. Next. Number 45, Vengefly King. Difficulty, 1. Fun factor, 1. Much like the Massive Moss Charger, this boss is a souped up version of a regular enemy. There's a couple more of these on the list, but the Vengefly King is definitely the least impressive of the ones remaining. The boss hovers slightly out of range for most of the fight and will either call in regular Vengeflies that can be easily dispatched, or swoop down to attack you, which is where you'll primarily be getting your hits in. The boss moves super slowly and is not easy to be hit by, which makes the fight more of a waiting game than an actual battle. At least you have to move in this one. The Ascended version of the boss adds a second Vengefly King to the mix, which does double the number of entities you need to be paying attention to, but it's not really harder, it's sorta just diminishing returns at that point. Number 44, Flukemarm. Difficulty, 1. Fun factor, 1. Oh, here's Flukemarm. Finally! I was wondering when we'd get here. Flukemarm is pretty globally considered to be one of the only truly bad boss designs in Hollow Knight, and for a good reason. In the story, the fight is a simple damage check. If you can one-shot the fluke phase that Flukemarm spits out, you win. If not, holy geez, you're in for one hell of a time, as it can get overwhelming fast. Flukemarm can actually be sort of fun under these conditions, but as it stands, this canonical MILF is still purely just a punching bag. In Godhome, she exists purely to fill the time between other actual fights. Flukemarm's only saving grace is that the boss at least respects your time. Unlike some other battles, there's no cooldown on damaging her, so you can end the fight as quickly as it starts and move on to, well, gameplay. Number 43, Uumuu, difficulty 2, fun factor 1. Uumuu, or as it's known in the storyline, the interactive cutscene. Uumuu has the same problem as the Vengefly King in that most of the fight is waiting for an opportunity to attack. But unlike with that boss, where smart positioning can let you get some hits in, Uumuu says, no, you can't hurt me until I decide it's okay. In the story version of the fight, you'll be jumping around the room dodging one of two very simple attacks constantly until Quarrel pops its protection for a few seconds so you can damage it. In the Godmaster version, you'll have to pop Uumuu by yourself by knocking Uumuus into it. The extra dodging and leading of explosive jellies does up the fight's interactivity by a bit, but at the end of the day, you still need to just jump around the stage until Uumuu decides it's time to summon friends. And if you miss your opportunity, back to the drawing board. Credit where credit is due, the gameplay of knocking the Uumuus around makes popping the Metroid-inspired balloons somewhat interesting, and there was a patch which increased the frequency with which Uumuu summons friends. However, Uumuu physics and rubber banding ends up being more wonky than not, and with the large number of platforms they can explode on before reaching their destination, you're much better off just waiting for a clear shot and knocking the explosion into Uumuu with a Shade Soul. So, more waiting. The rest of the fight isn't challenging whatsoever, so it's hard to not get bored while waiting for the stars to align, which not a good boss mechanic makes. The Ascended version of this fight replaces the acid water with a pit of poison gas, which actually does make positioning a decent bit harder, so it's not a total waste of your time. Just mostly one. Number 42, False Knight, difficulty 1, fun factor 1. The False Knight is the first entry on this list that I'd consider to be an actual boss, rather than a slightly larger regular enemy or a cutscene or Flukemarm. For what it's worth, the False Knight is actually an incredibly well-designed intro boss. With the possible exception of Gruz Mother, this is going to be the first big baddie that most players will fight, and it does a great job of being engaging and just tough enough to separate it from the respawnable foes in the Forgotten Crossroads. This Knight Errant is quite intimidating on the surface, which may trip you up on your first playthrough, but his tells are all slow and super obvious, making this quite a simple victory overall. After you beat this guy for the first time, he becomes a complete pushover and not much more than a way to fill time between other fierce foes. But at least you can spam through his health bar, and for what it's worth, he's a very good first boss. But he's still a first boss, you know? Number 41, Marmu. Difficulty 2, fun factor 1. The worst of the warrior dreams, in my humble opinion, has to be Marmu. While none of the warrior dreams, except Markoth, are designed to be particularly difficult foes, Marmu's fight manages to be just brainless enough to not be engaging at all, while still having the potential to punish you if you stop paying attention. Which is super easy, since this whole fight might as well be a game of glitchy paddleball. Marmu's momentum and trajectory can change on a dime, and she gets stuck in weird corners, which turns this otherwise massive Moss Charger level of smack back the enemy boss into one that can very easily catch you unawares and make you feel like a real dumb idiot. I mean, taking damage against Marmu? It's embarrassing given how easy this fight's mechanics should be, and yet we've all been there. Screw those corners. Number 40, Crystal Guardian. Difficulty 1. Fun factor 1. Coming in at the big 4-0 is the Crystal Guardian. I actually really love this boss. I wish he was harder. Rather, I wish he was hard, like, at all. But the concept is quite solid in my opinion. CG shoots lasers from his hands, jumps around, and occasionally makes 4 lasers shoot down from the ceiling after a short delay. I really do think Crystal Guardian is well designed. His lasers have an incredibly obvious tell, but are quick enough that you get exactly as much time as you need to get out of the way. Unlike a lot of attacks in this game, the hitbox also lingers for quite a while, meaning using the floaty jump mechanics properly is a necessity if you don't want to get hit. The boss is also very good at teaching players that dashing and nail bouncing is a great way to avoid damage, as even though CG doesn't take damage on the top half of his hitbox, it still refreshes your movement abilities in midair, which is super great for newer players to learn. If you've got the Shade Cloak, you can just go right through him, which makes things a lot simpler. Also, if you have any nail or damage charms, you can just wipe through CG's entire health bar in a matter of seconds. Hell, you can even kill this boss without starting the fight sequence if you're smelly enough. It's unfortunate that this boss is such a pushover, because there'd actually be a pretty interesting fight here if he didn't explode in 20 seconds of face tanking. Number 39, Winged Nosk. Difficulty 2. Fun factor 1.
Hey, Vengefly King, can I copy your homework?
Sure, but don't make it too obvious.
Winged Nosk is a boss with a huge amount of potential that just really falls flat. Combining Vengefly King's swoop and adds attacks with Nosk's 2 acid spray attacks does make this fight a little bit more difficult and engaging than the ones before it on this list, but not by a whole lot. Unlike Nosk, the fight has almost no pressure due to how long Winged Nosk takes to perform every attack, leaving huge healing opportunities every few seconds. Arguably, constant pressure is one of the only things Nosk does do well, so that's a huge knock against the winged variant. It's really a shame how two-dimensional this fight ends up being, because the lead-up is very good. Encountering Hornet in Pantheon 5 only for the iconic Nosk head crack and scream is a super cool fake out in the final moments of the game. It's also really interesting to consider that Beta Nosk did have wings, so it's possible that this is an older version of Nosk that tried preying on a young Hornet, who summarily kicked his ass and cut off his wings to turn him into the Nosk that we fight in the story. Unfortunately, this is maybe the only case in gaming history of feral monstrosity, but with wings this time, that is far less terrifying than the landlocked version. I honestly feel like just speeding up the tempo of this fight by decreasing downtime between attacks could have made this a decent duel. But alas. Number 38, Soul Warrior. Difficulty 1. Fun factor 1. Soul Warrior takes a similar role to a few of the previous bosses on this list in that it's kinda just a souped up version of a basic enemy. Although unlike Vengeflies and Moss Chargers, Soul Twisters are actually threatening. The game kinda tricks you into thinking this guy deserves mini-boss status instead of just being an enemy by locking you in the room that you fight him in during the story, and then does it again with some additional folly spawning. It's in the Hall of Gods and Pantheons though, so I guess that's the status Team Cherry felt this guy deserved. While having a larger health pool and larger variety of attacks than Soul Twisters makes this enemy more engaging to fight, it's actually a lot less frustrating since he doesn't fly or teleport every goddamn second. A lot of his attacks also resemble those of the Mantis Lords, which is also a huge plus in my book. It's not hard in the slightest, but there's enough moves on display here and a constant spawning of homing adds during the fight that keeps you entertained, despite the fact that this is really just a regular enemy in disguise. Number 37, Gruz Mother. Difficulty 1. Fun factor 1. The introductory boss for most players, Gruz Mother has a very simple attack pattern. She either does a body slam in the general direction of the knight, or winds up and bounces around the arena like a DVD logo screensaver. Upon death, all of her now severely cranially damaged children will burst out of her abdomen and present exactly 0 threat. The boss is about as basic as they get, as the player has only just been introduced to enemies with more than one attack and any sort of real health pool, but this fight manages to steal a higher slot on this list due to some of the arena changes in the Ascended and Radiant versions of the fight. Here, the solid floor gives way to several platforms with spikes between them, which actually really increases the need to play the fight carefully, especially at the Radiant level. The fight is, of course, still quite easy, but the limited ground options go a long way in forcing smart positioning if you don't want to get hit and make a fool of yourself, especially with how huge Gruz Mother's damage box is. The Ascended version of this fight does a really great job of changing the playing field just enough for a fresh spin on an otherwise very simplistic boss, both in the literal and figurative sense. Number 36, Hornet Protector. Difficulty 2. Fun factor 2. Your first encounter with the Silksong Senorita herself in Green Path is a pretty basic fight, but tends to be one of the big difficulty curves for new players. Without the dash, the knight's movement options are still severely limited, which prevents Hornet from getting too crazy with her attacks. Regardless, she does still manage to keep the pressure on against a player still unfamiliar with reading tells and boss pattern recognition. Up until this point, you've been fighting large and lumbering foes like Gruz Mother and False Knight, so a small and agile opponent like Hornet forces you to re-evaluate your bossing strategies, and the fight is very rewarding on the first victory. Discerning whether her jump is going to combo into a Gossamer Storm or a tracking diagonal down slash might leave first timers overwhelmed, but after getting the hang of this boss, Hornet begins to move in slow motion and her health bar becomes laughably small, making the fight more of an obligatory cameo than any real challenge. Speaking of cameos, Silksong Wen? Number 35, Gorb. Difficulty 2. Fun factor 2. It's your worm Gorb hitting the 35th spot. Among the warrior dreams, Gorb is probably the most simplistic sans Marmu, but the fight is a blast to play nonetheless. Gorb floats around the arena and shoots out a ring of spikes every few seconds that isn't too difficult to dodge. As the fight progresses, a second and third round of spikes get added to the attack, giving you less time to stay on the offensive if you want to avoid getting hit. The lead time on Gorb's attacks is quite large, giving you ample time to path out safe zones, but the timing gets more precise as extra waves get added. Getting close to the yodeling worm is obviously necessary if you want to get nail hits in, but the timing and positioning on dodging Gorb's attacks gets tighter the closer you are to his attack's origin. Staying near the boss in the fight early to build up soul and then unloading spells into them when the extra waves get added is likely your best option at staying safe. Of course, if you'd like to ascend with Gorb, you're gonna have to do all this but with 3 small platforms to stand on, making this bullet hell a bit more tricky. While not particularly difficult or complex, this fight does one thing and it does it well, making for an enjoyable, albeit samey, altercation. Number 34, God Tamer. Difficulty 3. Fun factor 1. Coming in at number 34 and also coming in after 20 minutes of painfully fooling around is God Tamer. This boss is very unique in that attempting the third Pantheon actually does not require beating this duo, despite every other boss in the game being a requirement to attempt their Pantheon. And that's for good reason. Other than Godhome, this pairless pair can only be fought as the final challenge in the Trial of the Fool. A lot of the perceived difficulty of this fight comes from the fact that you've already been knocked around for the past 10 to 20 minutes by every enemy imaginable, and that losing here means you get to do it all again. It's honestly more stressful than anything. God Tamer herself should be summarily ignored, as her attacks are slow, telegraphed, and have a way bigger hitbox than you'd think. Defeating the beast will end the fight, even if the Tamer still has health, whereas killing the Tamer first doesn't meaningfully change anything. As such, this fight devolves into big monster plus the annoyance pretty fast. The beast's attacks are limited, only really spitting infection at you or rolling into a ball and slamming across the arena, tracking your position when coming back down for a landing. Positioning yourself where you'd like the beast to land, alongside smart use of the Mantis Claw, Descending Dark, and Shade Soul abilities, should make quick work of this combo regardless of where you fight them. The real enemy is your own nerves constantly reminding you of the trial you'll need to redo if you mess up here. Number 33, No Eyes. Difficulty 3. Fun factor 2. Much like the God Tamer, the fiercest foe in the No Eyes fight is your own impatience. No Eyes presents a considerable challenge both in the storyline and Godhome. When fighting her in the Stone Sanctuary, the dark map will leave you guessing if that jump you're about to make is a safe one, especially with the floor littered with spikes and tons of wraiths weaving their way across the screen. In the Ascended version of the fight, the arena actually changes quite a bit, adding hazards in the form of thorns basically everywhere. No Eyes herself simply floats in place for a few seconds before teleporting, while her Medusa head-esque children bob and weave through the arena with increasing tempo the less HP their mother has left. You'll obviously need to get close to No Eyes in order to deal damage, which can be a tall order given the playing field and her penchant for persistent porting, so staying calm and collected and planning each jump thoroughly will give you your best shot at victory, even if your itchy trigger finger begs you to throw yourself directly into danger. Number 32, Tiso. Difficulty. Number 32, Brooding Mawlek. Difficulty 2. Fun factor 2. This is, in my opinion, the most default boss in Hollow Knight, which all other bosses should be compared to. The vanilla middle point of Hollow Knight boss design, as it were. Brooding Mawlek is very well designed in that you can load up a new file, immediately get to this boss in 5 minutes with some clever platforming, and defeat it with 0 upgrades or skills using a basic knowledge of Hollow Knight's mechanics and Brooding Mawlek's patterns. That is, in my opinion, the mark of a good, basic boss fight. This baddie has a surprising wealth of attacks, so learning its tells and proper positioning are immensely valuable in turning this optional ordeal into an engaging intro battle. The Mawlek will spew infection in an arc that tries to track the player with varying success as it walks back and forth across the middle platform. Get too close, and you'll be on the damaging end of a claw swipe. Every once in a while, the boss will spew a lot of infection onto the side of the arena you are on. You can either dash over the vomiting vermin, or, if you haven't unlocked the dash yet, you can nail bounce off of its head. The nail bounce is incredibly vital in this fight, as the Mawlek has enough downtime after this attack that you can easily switch sides while amassing very substantial damage. The corners of the arena will also usually be safe for healing during the one-at-a-time spray attack, but the boss can jump over to you, knocking you out of your heal before jumping directly back to the center platform. Mawlek has a fair amount of depth for how early it is possible to fight, and it really rewards you for understanding how the boss moves and making use of your nail pogo, making it a very fun fight to start off a playthrough if you're a veteran. The center platform is removed for the ascended version of the skirmish, which is a mixed bag in terms of difficulty. On one hand, it can now walk across the entire map, which adds some depth to avoiding melee attacks and its jump positioning. On the other hand, getting to the other side of the boss becomes a lot easier, which is one of the main mechanics of the fight. Despite not being an incredibly difficult foe, Brooding Mawlek's wealth of options, interesting arena, and player spacing mechanics make it a very good default boss to which I believe all the others can be fairly compared. Number 31, Galien. Difficulty 3. Fun factor 2. Next up on the Dream Warrior chopping block is Galien. Despite being one of the tougher Dream Warriors, Galien lands in the same pitfall as a lot of his spectral siblings in that his fight is very mechanically simple. Like the other Dream Warriors, Galien will simply float around the arena while his weapons do the work, the most prominent of which is a giant spinning scythe that tries very hard to track the player, but has a lot of inertia preventing it from homing in too closely. This attack is easily dodged by leading the scythe away from Galien and then dashing back towards him, forcing the weapon to bound around you while you wail on the wide wisp. Be careful, however, because much like Marmu, if Galien's scythe gets trapped into a corner, it has a tendency to break numerous physical laws and beeline for you at unreasonable speeds. Galien's second and third phases will each add another smaller scythe into the mix, which travel slowly and bounce around the arena independently like a screensaver. Keeping track of their current trajectory is very important when considering positioning, so that you don't end up dashing into one while getting away from the main scythe. Overall, this fight just ends up being a cooler and more engaging version of the Marmu battle, although it may give you some nasty White Palace flashbacks with all the spinning blades of death. If you're fighting Galien over in Deep Nest, make sure to pass by him and jump above the arena to grab a few lifeblood masks. You'll probably need them. Number 30, Broken Vessel. Difficulty 3. Fun factor 2. This boss actually made it onto the last Hollow Knight ranking video I did, and I stand by pretty much everything I said back then. Broken Vessel is a really great rival battle and arguably fits the bill of a mano-a-mano duel much better than the Hornet fights. Broken Vessel has a pretty long nail and will either dash at you on the ground or at the peak of a short hop after a decent wind-up, or will swing their nail back and forth in a vertical crescent several times if you get too close. He can also jump around, which hits people far more often than they're willing to admit, or do a slam from the mid-air position to release 4 rising blobs of infection. All in all, the boss's moveset mimics yours very well, with the added modifier of infection spewing from some attacks, which makes this a very interesting and evenly matched fight. Broken Vessel loves spending time arcing through the air, so staying close to the ground is generally your safest option. This becomes especially true when infected balloons begin to spawn in the arena, a very good use of adds to force smart positioning and keep pressure on during boss downtime. The use of some charms, such as Defender's Crest or Shape of Uumuu, will allow you to get heals in during some of the boss's staggers, of which there will be many if you're coming into this fight with an unupgraded nail. Finally, after getting deep enough into its health pool, the Broken Vessel will make its way to the center of the arena and spew a barrage of rising infection bubbles, which can be somewhat tricky to dodge. Using moves like Desolate Dive, which have lots of iframes and deal substantial damage, are a great way to speed through this phase while finishing off the boss for good. Despite being one of the easier mid-game bosses, the Broken Vessel really shines as Team Cherry's take on the Knight's moveset with an infected twist. The fight doesn't overstay its welcome, but given that the player has access to spells and the boss does not, your ranged options such as Vengeful Spirit may make the fight feel a bit one-sided at times. Number 29, Enraged Guardian. Difficulty 3. Fun factor 2. Coming in at number 29 is the first of Hollow Knight's many supercharged bosses. The Enraged Guardian takes the same basic gameplay loop as the Crystal Guardian and ups the ante with a smaller arena, faster movements, and double damage lasers. Otherwise, the fight stays largely the same. This includes the unfortunate fact that the boss has a very minimal amount of health and can be easily broken with the Shade Cloak. However, other than those complaints, this Guardian fight does a decent job of patching up the difficulty where the original was lacking. The smaller room size and increased fight tempo leave a lot less room for error, and mistakes can be very fatal in double damage fights like this one. The boss's speed and power make playing defensively extremely dangerous, as healing opportunities are not plentiful, and a single hit from the boss will require 2 heals to recover from. Keeping the pressure on the Guardian and ending the fight as fast as possible therefore becomes the name of the game, which is again somewhat unfortunate given how quickly this skirmish subsides when you're slashing through a small stamina supply. Number 28. Nosk. Difficulty 3. Fun factor 2. Nosk is a much worse boss in the basic campaign. Leagues worse. We're talking winged Nosk levels of build-up versus execution. The Deep Nest variant of this creepy creature takes you on a short and spooky journey through dark tunnels before locking you in a room with a doppelganger of yourself, which turns into a giant feral monstrosity. This monstrosity then runs at you, and that's about it. Nosk's move pool is painfully shallow for when he's fought, as this boss will either run at you, jump around the arena, or stand in the middle and spew infection in multiple arcs across the room. After taking out enough health, he'll occasionally jump onto the ceiling and chase you with dropping blobs of infection before jumping back down to where you were standing. This attack is easily dodged by scooting yourself forward slowly, although you'll need to time a dash if you end up cornered and need to change directions. Otherwise, everything this feral foe does can be safely avoided from the left corner of the center platform in the normal arena. The Ascended version of Nosk, however, takes things to a new level, by, somewhat ironically, leveling the playing field. Without any safe alcoves to cheese the creep from, you're forced to constantly run from the relentless rogue if you want to avoid being mowed down. This version of the fight also makes Nosk's sudden stops in the middle of the arena for his eruption attack more dangerous, as it can halt without warning, making it very easy to take contact damage. The removal of the ledges means the pressure is constantly on the player if they want any chance of putting some distance between themselves and the doppelganger for healing opportunities or extra time to evade attacks. I simply wish the Deep Nest version of the fight lived up to the oppressive opening act. Number 27. Elder Hu. Difficulty 2. Fun factor 2. Among the fights in this section, the Elder provides less of a challenge than most, and by virtue of being a warrior dream has a very shallow move pool. However, the attacks that Elder Hu does have are quite enjoyable to play against. This floating foe will either spawn many columns of rings in the air to slam down into the ground after a short delay, or will disappear and send a cascade of these rings traveling across the length of the arena. Positioning is key, and finding the sweet safe spots between slams gets your blood pumping in the best of ways. The simplicity of the attacks is complemented by their quick execution, giving you just enough time to analyze the arena and dash to safety. The cascade attack is identical every time, which makes it less interesting. I wish Elder Hu would randomly choose a starting side and cascade across the map in the opposite direction, as it would introduce some variance to the attack. Unfortunately, reaching Elder Hu in the Pantheons will bring upon the painful realization that the Shade Cloak completely removes your prerogative for perfect positioning if you time your dashes accordingly. This ability trivializes the fight and makes it feel lackluster when you're fully decked out. It's a huge shame too, because Elder Hu pre-Shade Cloak is a ton of fun, but is a version of the fight that many players understandably never get to face. Number 26. Oblobbles. Difficulty 3. Fun factor 2. Hollow Knight has its fair share of bosses that use bullet hell-esque attacks, but the Oblobbles take that concept and roll with it to its natural conclusion. The fight is incredibly simplistic, as there's only one move to watch out for. The two Oblobbles will fly around the map, periodically stop and shoot infection bullets in random directions for a few seconds. Having 2 points of origin for the bullets actually makes them quite difficult to keep track of and dodge successfully. You'll be encountering the Oblobbles either at the end of the Trial of the Conqueror or in the second Pantheon, so both versions of the fight take place amongst other combat challenges, meaning you may not be entering in tip-top shape. Small mistakes can easily throw off your rhythm for the whole fight, and the fact that the 2 points of origin are constantly on the move makes this the best bullet hell Hollow Knight has to offer. Once one of the Oblobbles goes down, the second will get a boost to its health and speed. The increased bullet velocity makes up for the loss of the second attacker, and works well in a manner not unlike the Mantis Lords, in which attacks must be dodged at a faster pace after having learned them in the first phase of the fight. You can either choose to focus down one Oblobble to get to the second phase ASAP, or try to equally damage them throughout the first phase to shorten the second. The fight allows you to lengthen and shorten the phases depending on which you feel more comfortable with, which is an interesting and unique manner of letting the player set their own difficulty. Number 25. Xero. Difficulty 2. Fun factor 2. Much like the other warrior dreams, Xero takes a very simple concept and moveset and executes it with varying levels of success. Despite being one of the simpler fights and potentially the introduction to the warrior dreams due to its proximity to the Dream Nail, the Xero fight ends up being one of the more engaging ones. He hovers back and forth above the arena with a nail on either side, which he will alternate throwing at your position. The attack is quite easy to dodge, but what makes this attack interesting is that these nails will then boomerang back to their position next to Xero. As such, you need to take into account not only where he throws the weapon, but his position at the end of the attack and how it will affect the nail's return trip. The nails will track pretty closely to your position, so if you are keeping the offensive presence up, the nails will have a pretty straight shot at smacking the back of your head on their return trip. Partway into the fight, Xero will summon an extra 2 nails, which both increases the danger hitbox on either side of him, as well as increasing the tempo at which you'll need to dodge his throws. The Resting Grounds version of the fight has a very accessible save spot, as the ground below the battle platform is too low for any of Xero's attacks to consistently reach. If you're ever in need of healing, you can jump off, regain your bearings, and enter the fight at your leisure. The Godhome variant of the fight turns the ground into a single platform, removing the save spot, and the Ascended variant splits up the platform into 3 smaller ones, making your orientation options all the more onerous.
Number 24, Soul Master. Difficulty 2. Fun factor 3.
The sizable Sovereign of the Soul Sanctum is usually fought by most players after obtaining the Mantis Claw and maybe a nail upgrade or 2, and at this power level I hear a lot of complaints about his difficulty for first timers. Part of this difficulty does indeed come from the boss's mechanics, although a lot of it is admittedly due to the long trek back to the arena through the dangerous sanctum proper. Not having a bench very close nearby can be something of a pain point for the boss, which is why it can sometimes feel more difficult than it actually is for newer players. Soul Master's attacks boil down to 2 variants of shooting soul spheres and a ground slam. Most of the time, the master will be floating in one spot, shoot a tracking soul orb, and then teleport. There's not too much time to catch him before he zips out, so playing aggressively with some form of nail lengthening charm can go a long way. He might also spawn halfway up either side of the arena, creating 4 orbs that rotate around him with a fixed radius. After traveling the length of the arena with this merry-go-round of death, he'll port away and send the spinning shield back in the direction he came from, a la Mega Man's Leaf Shield. If he spawns in a corner near the ground, he'll instead float across the map trying to ram you, and if he appears overhead he'll be coming down for a ground slam, which sends shockwaves in either direction. This attack can even be faked out into a second ground slam. Needless to say, Soul Master has a pretty large variety of attacks, which adds to the terror of taking him on. Despite this, the boss is rather slow. After getting a handle on his full moveset, you'll realize you have ample time to prepare for any move and get some counterattacks if you're clever. Staying aggressive within your means should result in a steady stream of damage without putting yourself in harm's way, making this an enjoyable encounter once you've locked down the mechanics. The boss also has a wild fake out after beating his first phase, which sends you into a very quick-paced second phase of constant ground slams that require proper use of your dash to escape unscathed. If you can survive his onslaught of dives, you'll get a chance to attack him for a few seconds as he floats in midair, summoning more spheres to follow you. Finally, you can take down the bloated bastard for good. In repeat trials, this second phase tends to be more of a chore than anything, but it successfully keeps the pressure on in this high-octane fight and changes things up just enough to keep newer players on their toes.
Number 23, Brothers Oro and Mato. Difficulty 3. Fun factor 3.
A boss originally added in the Godhome expansion, your first encounter with Nailmaster Oro awaits atop the first Pantheon. This Nailmaster is quite a large foe with an even larger nail, so you'll either need to meet his range with nail lengthening charms or use your movement options wisely to stay out of his attack range. Oro can do 2 slashes in front of him to cover a lot of ground, much like the Watcher Knights, or jump into the air and slam down with his nail in front of him. Getting behind Oro is the name of the game here, as he'll be unable to attack in the other direction for a few seconds after starting a move. Oro is, of course, able to use his patented dash slash, in which he will start in the corner of the room, charge up, and perform a screen-wide attack that can be jumped over. Overall, he can be compared to a slightly more complex Watcher Knight with less rolly action. However, once knocking down Oro, Nailmaster Mato comes in for the assist, and the real battle against the temporarily reconciled brothers ensues. Mato will perform all the same moves as Oro, but switches up the dash slash for the Cyclone Slash, a move which will send him spinning into the air before following up with a normal aerial attack. Getting a chance to fight these 2 teachers is a terrific trial, as they work in tandem to corner you and deal the finishing blow. The brothers will usually attack one at a time, while the other stands back, so attacking the foremost foe is favorable. They'll protect each other during their nail art windups and occasionally do a combo attack, so trying to go for the brother in the back is often more trouble than it's worth unless you're using Shade Soul. The fight's second stage really picks up the action as Mato joins the fray, and this pair do a great job of covering each other's downtime, making for a fun fracas to end the Pantheon of the Master.
Number 22, Hive Knight. Difficulty 3. Fun factor 3.
Anyone who has watched my top 5 Hollow Knight areas list knows that I absolutely adore the Hive. It was a pretty big letdown for me that the area didn't have any sort of final skirmish to prove your worthiness to Queen Vespa and obtain the Hive Blood charm. Well, the boys over at Team Cherry have got me, because adding a boss to the Hive is exactly what they did in the Lifeblood update, an originally unplanned expansion that got added due to the structural changes the Nintendo Switch hardware required. And oh boy, does the fight deliver. The Hive Knight's moveset is pretty similar to Hornet's second fight, which is quite fitting considering they probably trained together under Vespa. Alongside the hopping action you've gotten quite used to between the Hornet and Broken Vessel battles, Hive Knight also has quite a substantial forward slash and can teleport around the arena before performing a swipe. He can also set up several honey traps in the arena which can be knocked around and explode into needles in a Gorb-esque fashion. Finally, this buzzy body can vomit up a whole swarm of hivelings that rain down on the knight in a manner quite similar to an inverse Broken Vessel infection attack. This fast-paced fight has a really good difficulty level and lasts long enough to be engaging, and while the boss only has a few primary ways of directly damaging you, the tells are quick and the locations varied, always keeping you on the edge of your seat. This is another fight where you constantly need to keep track of every part of the screen while you go toe-to-toe with your foe. Shade Cloak is invaluable here, and Sharp Shadow puts in work as well, so if you're a fan of that charm, this is a great place to use it. This fight honestly feels right at home with the rival bosses like Hornet and Broken Vessel, which was an unexpected but appreciated addition. Number 21, Dung Defender. Difficulty 2. Fun factor 3. Doma everybody, it's time to talk about one of my favorite bosses, the Dung Defender. Everything about this character and his fight just ooze with positive and fun energy, whether he's goading you on while you trek through the sewers, throwing giant poo balls at you and then bouncing around with them, or literally just swimming through fecal matter and bursting out in a big excrement explosion. This guy is just fun. Dung Defender was originally on my top 10 list, but got kicked off when the Grimm Troupe update released because the harsh reality of this fight is that it's way too easy. The Defender's placement in the Royal Waterways means that players will be encountering him at very different points in their adventure based on the path around Hallownest they take, so Dung Defender did, at some level, need to be accessible enough for players who had just reached the City of Tears for the first time. But I still believe he's undertuned. Everything this boss does has a huge wind-up, and none of the attacks move particularly fast, even after the second phase speeds up the fight. In addition, the corners of the map are usually pretty safe places to go for a heal, as very rarely will one of Ogrim's attacks connect in those locations. So even if you're fighting him fresh out Mantis Village, he's still very, very doable. And if you have any upgrades whatsoever, be it damage, charms, or even the Desolate Dive spell, which trivializes this fight, the bout ends before it has a chance to begin. To some degree, I think the low difficulty may be part of this fight's appeal. Since there's not too much at stake, the player gets a chance to mess around with Pooh Boy and revel in his high energy vibes. However, with how simple and short the fight ends up being, the duel ends in disappointment when you realize it's already over. Number 20, Troupe Master Grimm. Difficulty 3. Fun factor 3. The Grimm Troupe expansion was the first expansion added to the game after my playthrough, so I was very excited to get back into the game when it rolled around. The new characters looked really cool and some intense new boss battles had been promised. And Grimm? He did not disappoint. With 4 primary attacks, the fight is not too difficult to get your bearings in, but still offers a lot of room for exploration of combat mechanics. Grimm's quite the slippery fellow, both in his mannerisms and his fighting style. He'll be off-screen for most of the fight, only teleporting onto the arena when performing an attack. If he starts in the air, he'll dive down towards the knight and then dash in a direction as soon as he hits the ground. If teleporting in at your level, he'll either dash forward into an uppercut attack bursting into flames, send his cloak into the floor to send giant spikes across the stage, or throw several flame bats your way. Grimm's fight is very fast-paced and his AI is somewhat context sensitive. If you get too close to him before he can start his attack, he'll skitter away before resuming his onslaught, which is a very nice touch. The Master of the Troupe won't be giving you a second to breathe unless you can stagger him, so this entire fight is played in a very reactionary manner. You need to immediately recognize what attack the Glowering Goth is going for and decide your plan of attack accordingly. Just dodging everything Grimm throws at you won't be enough to cinch victory, as playing purely defensively will mean you never get a chance to deal any damage. Additionally, when starting the fight, Grimm will bow to you to proceed with the performance. If you're a trigger-happy hooligan and smack Grimm during his curtsy, he'll show his frustration by leading off with an attack I have yet to discuss, the Flame Spawner. Grimm puffs into a balloon in the center of the room and sends several waves of fireballs that you must dodge in a bit trip runner fashion. Grimm is even vulnerable to spell damage during this attack if you're brave enough to chance the frames, so no matter what this boss does, there's always an opportunity for a counterattack, a very appreciated mechanic. This Flame Spawner attack used to be a regular attack Grimm would use at random intervals throughout the fight, but a more recent update has changed Grimm to only use it when hitting 75, 50, and 25% health, another very welcome adjustment that lets you gauge how close you are to winning. Overall, Grimm's decently large move pool and constant onslaught of attacks force the player into a reactionary playstyle which doesn't get too old or easy no matter when in the game you fight him.
Number 19, Traitor Lord. Difficulty 4. Fun factor 3.
Back during Hollow Knight's first few patches, the Traitor Lord was about as big of a dud as they get. For a late game boss, he presented no threat at all. He was but a bigger hitbox version of a Mantis Traitor, and made for one huge meme boss as far as anyone was concerned. But the meme would not last, as Team Cherry recognized their mistakes with the massive Mantis and added a slew of changes in the Lifeblood update to turn the Traitor into a true terror. Alongside his original 2 attacks, the vanilla dash and dive that all Mantis Traitors are capable of, the Traitor Lord learned a few new tricks to use when being fought from afar. A set of oscillating blade boomerangs, and a full screen shockwave that must be shadow dashed through. Oh yeah, they also added double damage to all of his attacks besides the boomerangs, so yeah, a bit tougher. While shade cloaking your way through the boss at close range is still the best way to dispose of him, the extra punishment on mistakes makes a big difference. Fleeing from your foe is also no longer a safe option for healing, as the big baddie's new ranged moves are arguably more dangerous than his melee motions. The additions to the Traitor Lord fight really up the ante by forcing cleaner play and removing hard cheese opportunities the boss used to have, turning the tussle into a fast and frenetic fray of frames, in which managing the shade dash cooldown is absolutely vital to victory.
Number 18, The Collector. Difficulty 3. Fun factor 3.
At the top of the Tower of Love, you'll get a pretty unique fight against the Collector. A boss who just jumps around and occasionally makes slashes at you, but spends most of his time jumping into the ceiling and chucking jars at you which explode into minor enemies upon hitting the ground, all while cackling maniacally as a slightly off-tuned version of the vanilla boss theme plays. It's an interesting experience for sure, but with a few nail upgrades, the Balders, Aspid Hunters, and Vengeflies will pose a non-threat to you, and simply act as a soul generation mechanism, as hitting the Collector himself does not fill the soul gauge, something of a fun lore integration into game mechanics which I quite enjoy. But overall, the fight doesn't pose a huge challenge if you've been keeping up with the Nailsmith. Then of course, there's the Ascended version in Godhome, and hoo boy! The enemies he drops will switch from your standard Forgotten Crossroads fare into Armored Squits, Sharp Alders, and of course, the biggest jerks of them all, Primal Aspids. Now, things are getting interesting. With a health of 26, these foes won't fall to even the pure nails damage unless Strength is equipped, and I don't think I need to tell you as to why getting close to a Primal Aspid is dangerous in the first place.
Or like, in the same room as a Primal Aspid, really.
This change to the fight really has a huge effect on how it is best approached, as getting overwhelmed by these foes is a very real danger, especially in the double damage world of Ascended difficulty. Dealing with the adds quickly and preferably from a distance forces the use of the soul mechanic quite well, as you can't use spells to efficiently dispatch the enemies without first putting yourself in harm's way for some regular nail attacks. The Collector doesn't provide any soul on hit, so strategizing and prioritizing enemies you go in on versus enemies you cast spells on leads to a very interesting and dynamic management of your soul gauge. If you can time one of the Collector's staggers at a point where there are no other threats in the room, here's a little tip. Hitting the cackling creep with the Dream Nail will actually reward you with soul, giving you some breathing room for when the next set of enemies arrive on the scene. While the Collector battle is by no means an incredibly difficult or mechanically deep encounter, the substitution of adds to decently dangerous enemies adds a lot in the way of situational strategic soul supervision that you won't find in too many other fights.
Number 17, Markoth. Difficulty 5. Fun factor 4.
Hoo boy. Okay. Alright, it's Markoth time. This guy is, well, he's a Dream Warrior alright, which means he'll be floating around the room while you get attacked by other entities. This time, it's nails that spawn randomly around the map and make a beeline for you roughly once every 1 or 2 seconds. These nails pass through all terrain and have very few limits on where they can spawn, so you'll need to be very careful throughout the entire fight if you don't want to get hit. Markoth will also spend the entire battle with a Dream Shield that orbits him and will block attacks if it is between your Nail Slash and the Moth himself. Every once in a while, Markoth will cease his Nail Barrage to perform Shield Cyclone, a move in which the shield surrounding him will speed up and increase its radius before retracting once again after a few seconds. Once he hits half health, Markoth will increase the speed of his nail summons to roughly once every 0.75 to 1.25 seconds, and he'll gain a second shield orbital, which will stay close to him while performing the Shield Cyclone attack. Overall, a pretty complex boss, especially for a Dream Warrior, which requires constant attention across the map. Then of course, there's the Ascended version of this fight in which it was decided that having a floor was for rubes, and you could make do with 5 small platforms to survive this menacing moth's myriad of missiles. This is a really hard fight, and it can be super frustrating. The constant threat of homing nails prevents you from ever getting a chance to heal, and getting close to the boss is very dangerous due to his shields. Of course, getting close at the wrong time is also completely ineffective if there is a shield between you and your target. The lack of much solid ground in this fight gives you even less maneuverability and encourages you to go airborne, which is, by the way, a bad idea given how much harder it is to move around and dodge the nails in the air. Patience is the name of the game here. To get through Markoth unscathed, you'll need to play primarily defensively while Nail Barrage is ongoing, and go in for hits during the few seconds Shield Cyclone allows. Focusing too much on an offensive presence makes you very easy to punish. When the second stage of the skirmish starts, getting close to the boss becomes exponentially more dangerous, so saving soul for this phase is ideal, as you'll want to finish him off with some spells and keep yourself about as far away from any damage hitboxes as possible. I am really torn about this fight. On one hand, it's a very good test of precision platforming and stage spacing. Playing safely makes the fight doable, but it's still super frustrating. The randomness of Markoth's movements and the places his nails spawn can just feel like bad luck sometimes, and while having the perfect run is incredibly satisfying as you watch the rat bastard explode into essence after trials and tribulations, the fight can feel so stacked against you during some segments that you feel helpless to do anything but try and outlast his onslaught. Losing the fight because a nail that spawned in the wall comes at you from off screen, or watching as you helplessly fall into a newly spawned nail after having used all your air movement isn't that fun. It just hurts. It hurts deep. When the Markoth fight goes well, the difficulty enhances the experience immensely, but those lows are just so damn low.
Number 16. Absolute Radiance. Difficulty 5. Fun factor 4.
The literal pinnacle of Hollow Knight bosses, by far the hardest, longest, and most epic fight in the entire game, only accessible after ascending to the peak of the Pantheon of Hallownest after defeating every other boss, one after another, in a long and arduous climb. And the fight? It delivers. I have some issues with this fight, but let me start with the good stuff. This is really about as intense and epic as it gets. The atmosphere in this battle as you finally raise your nail against the God of Gods, ascending ever higher up golden spires, chasing her above the clouds, beyond the sight of the Godseeker and all the enemies you've fought so far in a final showdown to become the ultimate being. Despite my issues with the fight's placement, I have to acknowledge that the energy of this fight would not have packed nearly the same punch anywhere else. I do wish these endings were more accessible to anyone besides elite Hollow Knight players, but Team Cherry has made their stance clear on placing lore before gameplay, and while I don't think the Pantheon 5 is a good player experience and is a blemish on an otherwise perfect game, first, let's talk bosses. Abstrad does not deal contact damage and will teleport around the arena occasionally. She can launch 2 waves of swords outwards from her body that have a slight rotation to them, or 3 waves of swords from either side of the map, or 4 waves of swords from the ceiling. She can also spawn up to 4 light orbs that will track very closely to the player, emit 3 bursts of radial light beams in quick succession, or send a giant wave of light across the screen that must be dashed through. There can be some frustrating issues with the orb and light wave attacks. In the airborne phase of the fight, the orbs may sometimes travel through platforms if they had only recently spawned, which can catch you unawares if you expect them to collide with the platforms, which they normally would. The other problem, and one that many people take issue with, is that the Radiance can start another attack once the wave of light has reached halfway across the screen. If you let the wave chase you too long, by the time you dash through it the boss will have started another attack, putting you in a position where damage is literally unavoidable sometimes. For this reason, I highly recommend dashing through the wall as soon as possible so that you have time to recover and get your shadow dash back before the wall reaches the halfway point of the arena and the boss makes its next move. After enough damage, Abstrad will summon spikes along the ground on either side of the arena, giving you less room for maneuverability. She can still spawn over that side of the map and will periodically change the location of the spikes, so playing defensively and not chasing the boss over spikes is safest. After enough damage in this phase, she'll spawn a few spikes on either side and start summoning an endless rain of swords from the sky until you deal enough damage to reach phase 4. Once you've jumped up to the aerial segment, which is the longest phase by a sizable margin, you'll need to dodge all the same attacks as before while maintaining your stability on the floating platforms. Moving out of this is the climb phase, in which you'll need to climb up many platforms while the Radiance shoots light beams at you that get more and more accurate the higher you get. This would be the final phase of the fight normally, but Absolute Radiance adds another phase at the top of the arena with 2 small platforms to stand on while the boss teleports between the left, center, and right sections of the screen while constantly spawning light orbs. After dealing enough damage in this phase, you've finally done it. Needless to say, it is a long and arduous fight, even more so if you spent the past 30 to 45 minutes battling your way through the Pantheon of Hallownest. Her attacks are much faster than those of the original Radiance, and she'll still be dealing 2 damage per hit. I've heard complaints about this boss being legitimately unfair, and I was once one of the people who said that. However, the claims about undodgeable damage are not true. Calling this fight absolute dice is still accurate in that which attacks she performs are random, and some combos are harder to deal with than others, but the fact stands that with enough practice and patience, the fight is beatable without taking a hit. Playing defensively and only attacking when in a good position is vital for this fight. There's no affording hits here, so focusing on dodging all attacks is by far the best way to get through. There will eventually be a chance to attack the boss safely, so I'm begging you, just wait. The tension is high and the punishment for losing incredibly severe, so this battle is about as high adrenaline as you can get. And under the right circumstances, it can be incredible. Expertly weaving through Abstrad's attacks and showing complete mastery over the game is a wild and satisfying experience. However, I need to dock points, and a lot of them. Because those lows we discussed with Markoth, try that, but way lower. Mariana Trench levels of awful feelings. The fight is so long, and while this may make it seem epic, it can also feel like a slog by the time you get to the aerial section. Even if you're just fighting this boss in the Hall of Gods, it's quite tiresome having to constantly be at peak performance for this long. This problem is only made exponentially worse in Pantheon 5, where not only has your endurance already been tested against every other boss in the game, but losing does not mean you go back to phase 1. It means you go back to Vengefly King. I don't believe that anyone could reasonably go into this fight blind and win it on their first try without being some sort of actual god of gods. If it's possible and you've done it, I bow in respect. But the fact is that encountering this boss naturally at the top of P5 is a terrible experience. There's no way to train beforehand, as her statue only unlocks after reaching her in P5, and the fight is way too intense to get on your first try. This means at the very best, you'll get through Pantheon 5 on your first try, which is also very unlikely, unlock Abstrad, train in the Hall of Gods until you perfect the boss, and then do P5 a second time flawlessly and win. Unreasonable doesn't even begin to describe it. There's no percentage tied to Pantheon 5, but there is an achievement and 2 very lore important endings locked behind it, which somewhat baffles me. The Path of Pain, which is arguably a far easier task, has no achievement tied to it and only gives a 5-second lore tidbit and a journal entry. Why was this not done the same way? Why is arguably one of the coolest and most important cutscenes in the game locked behind toiling endlessly at a boss rush that takes the better part of an hour for a single attempt? It's not respectful of the player's time, and I think it's bad design, as cool as the payoff may be. While I disagree with those that say Absolute Radiance is an unfair fight, I understand where they are coming from. The fight can and does absolutely feel unwinnable under those conditions. For that reason, despite this being a truly amazing boss, I am placing it at number 16. Number 15, Hornet Sentinel, difficulty 3, fun factor 4. Hornet's second fight takes place after you've most likely obtained all the movement upgrades, which really allowed Team Cherry to go all out on making a satisfying and mechanically intense rematch. The only new attack Hornet has going into this fight is a parry, which can be tricky to plan for, but can be safely countered if you're nail bouncing. However, with a much larger pool of health and an incredible speed boost from the first fight, it feels like a totally new experience regardless. The same tactics can be used as last time, but the duel is really going to test if you've at all improved since the first encounter, as attacks are now much quicker and flow together in a way that makes Hornet Protector look like a stationary punching bag. Once the fight progresses into its second stage, Hornet will introduce a new mechanic, where she throws several floating spike traps into the playing field. These can be knocked out of existence with a nail swipe, but do force your attention away from the boss for a few seconds, as they can be deadly if left unattended. But you hardly need less space to maneuver yourself as Hornet hops around like a rabbit on Red Bull. She can be dispatched without too much trouble with enough damage upgrades, but the process is incredibly fun and never feels out of your control. Even when fully decked out, Hornet still poses a decent challenge due to her speed and litheness that never feels overbearing and doesn't overstay its welcome. Number 14, Lost Kin, difficulty 4, fun factor 4. Just barely beating out Hornet for the number 14 slot, the Lost Kin fight is very similar in its strengths to the previous entry and wins out for me due to it being a more intense skill check. Lost Kin functions identically to the Broken Vessel, a fight I have previously lauded for its moveset balancing, except happening at a much faster tempo. Notably, the barrage of rising infection bubbles is missing from this fight, likely because the attack was too long-winded and would mess with the pacing. Given, that attack was never a favorite of mine, as it is easily cheesable with Descending Dark, so I don't miss it particularly when compared with the non-stop offensive presence Lostkin brings to the table. As mentioned before, this fight feels like a really amazing rival duel with an infected twist, and the infection balloons are some of the most effective adds in the game. While in the original fight they would keep pressure on while BV was between attacks, this fight has that constant pressure already, so they serve to make managing your distance and positioning much more difficult as they relentlessly track you. Trying to find a spare moment to dispose of the balloons while the Lostkin rides your ass really keeps the pressure on. While in the base fight the balloons will often act as a deterrent to healing during a boss stagger, in this fight you'll be praying for a stagger just so that you can take care of the damn orange ghosts. Oh yeah, and this boss has tons of staggers, which I like because it gives you positive reinforcement throughout the fight that yes, you are making progress. A nice reminder when you start going against the hardest bosses in Hollow Knight.
Number 13, Watcher Knights. Difficulty 4. Fun factor 4.
When it comes to required fights in Hollow Knight, it doesn't get more intense than the Watcher Knights. These roly-polies provide the biggest non-optional skill check in the game, which makes them quite a doozy in challenge runs. While each of the knights has a very simplistic moveset, consisting of a double forward slash and rolling or bouncing across the stage, the depth comes into play when managing multiple foes at once. Starting the fight, you'll only be facing a single knight, giving you a chance to learn the moveset. As soon as you take it out or take too long, a second Watcher Knight will appear. And then a third. And then a fourth. And then more after that. For the majority of this skirmish, you'll be facing two baddies at once, and the long arena can make keeping track of everything tough. Ideally, you'll want to lead both bugs to one side of you so that you can manage them better, but they'll do what they want to do and you're just going to have to adapt. Normally, the fight has 6 knights total, but if you break the ceiling outside the arena, you can actually drop a chandelier on one of them, making things slightly simpler with 5 foes. Godhome does not offer you this privilege, so you'll want to focus on using Shade Soul to hit them both when they're on the same side, and Descending Dark for the iframes when you're in a pickle. Dream nailing the knights as they first get up is also possible, but becomes harder once you've already got several on the screen. Of course, I'm also a huge sucker for visible fight progression, and it doesn't get more visible than leaving corpses in your wake as you carve through the knight's ranks. Making sense of the madness and disposing of the crew one at a time is a lot of fun and really stands out as a test of skill, even when you're avoiding battling all the optional bigger baddies this game's got in the bag.
Number 12, White Defender. Difficulty 4. Fun factor 4. This bodacious beetle might have a rather unfortunate title that reminds us of the literal cesspool of opinions present on every social media network these days, but despite that, Ogrim is back in full force at the number 12 slot. Remember how I said I absolutely loved the Dung Defender fight, but didn't place it higher because the fight ends too quickly? Well, it seems like Team Cherry felt the same way because they took all that dung flinging fun and turned up the heat to a new level. This fight shares the exact same amazing atmosphere as the base version, but turns up the speed to make sure that there are no lulls in the excitement whatsoever. The fight also lasts a lot longer this time due to the extra health, and the extra poo waves that White Defender can create add a new dimension to the fight and encourage the use of the Shade Cloak. Descending Dark also won't knock White Defender out of the ground, meaning you have no choice but to experience this encounter in all of its glory. Having an endgame version of the Dung Defender is such a good idea, and I'm glad Team Cherry decided to put it in the Hidden Dreams update. In Hallownest, you can fight him up to 5 times with increasing damage on each attempt, but Radiant Mode essentially offers you a greater challenge now that Godmaster exists. This is such an incredible and fun fight in every way. If I had to name a single gripe, it would be that no matter how fast you make the defender, most of the attacks are still pretty basic and don't present much of a challenge. Yeah, Team Cherry, I'm asking you to make an even harder version of the Dung Defender. I need more Ogrim in my life. Please. Number 11, Soul Tyrant. Difficulty 4. Fun factor 4. The next dream variant on the list is Soul Tyrant, the supercharged version of the Soul Master from the City of Tears. Much like the other refights, Soul Tyrant borrows a moveset and general fight progression from its predecessor with a few minor changes and a huge boost to health and speed. The shockwaves from his slam are now more deadly, as they are taller, longer, and travel faster. It's still possible to jump over them normally, but the Monarch wings are recommended. His merry-go-round of death attack also changes, and now has 6 orbs in a formation similar to the face of a die. This attack is still pretty easy to dodge and allows a healing opportunity if you stand in the center of the arena. The Soul Tyrant is a really fantastic fight for a few reasons. To start, the base material it is working with is quite solid. The Soul Master's move pool is deep and varied, making for a difficult and interesting fight even without the dream boosts. Unlike the Soul Master, however, the trek back to the Soul Tyrant consists of dream nailing the Master's corpse again, bypassing the need for the long and dangerous trek back from a bench that Soul Master is infamous for. Finally, as a late game boss, Team Cherry once again assumes that you have all the abilities and upgrades you need and is happy to throw the kitchen sink at you. Most of your abilities have their chance to shine in this fight, sans Isma's Tear and Mantis Claw. Shade Soul and Abyss Shriek are fantastic damaging options, and Descending Dark allows you to avoid hits and heavily damage the boss during his side ramming attack. This frantic fight against the bloated blob himself will have you fleeing in a frenzy as shockwaves and soul orbs come bearing down on you from every direction, while you desperately try and hit the Tyrant before he disappears once more. This is one seriously fulfilling fray, and the lack of any punishment for death makes it all the sweeter. Number 10. Mantis Lords. Difficulty 2. Fun factor 5. Mantis Lords. What is there to say about this fight that hasn't already been said? This is Team Cherry's mastery of boss battlecraft firing on all cylinders. To do so much with so little, how is it even possible? This fight is available as early as obtaining the Mantis Claw, which means it needs to be scaled down for new players. And yet, no matter how long one plays this game or how good one gets, the Mantis Lords never fail to provide a rush equal to that of the game's toughest customers. The fight starts out quite simply. A single Mantis Lord begins to attack you either by slamming down from above, dashing across the screen, or hanging to a wall and throwing a boomerang. The boss is only on screen during the duration of her attacks, meaning you have to fight in a reactionary manner. This phase is simple and the Lord quite slow, allowing this fight to act as something of a tutorial. After defeating the first Mantis Lord, the second and third begin their attacks simultaneously, and this is where the magic happens. The difficulty curve so smoothly increases from an introductory fight to an accelerating apex as pieces fall into place, and the instincts you learned from fighting one Lord go into overdrive as you find yourself weaving between the Mantis' attacks. The design of this duel is absolute genius, as it introduces a completely natural way to double the tempo of the fight without taking you by surprise or taking away your tools of success. Its simplicity allows for even the newest of players to quickly understand and learn what they need to do without giving the player any easy outs or forcing veterans to waste their time with an underpowered foe. No matter what your skill level or your upgrade level, this battle will always be an absolute joy to go back to. And that's just damn good design. Number 9. Paintmaster Sheo. Difficulty 3. Fun factor 5. Atop the pantheon of the artist, Sheo awaits you with a duel that completely blows the battle against his brothers away. Sheo is not particularly difficult, but its fight is so complex and unique that I've absolutely fallen in love with it, despite its one rather unfortunate fault. As an artist, Sheo signals and performs attacks with various colors of paint. A yellow tip signals a forward spear that covers most of the arena. Blue will mean he will slam the ground, causing 3 globs of paint to splash forward in arcs. Red paint means that Sheo is about to jump forward, sending 6 paint globules down at parabolic trajectories before landing. And magenta is, of course, Sheo's very own Great Slash, a large hitbox swing that will send paint raining down from above throughout the arena. Alongside this, the Paintmaster can react in a similar manner to Grimm, where he may roll away from you or jump forward depending on the duel's current status. Sheo certainly has a wide array of attacks, but the use of various colors as a supplemental tell to his movements is such a novel idea that really pushes this fight above and beyond. Any fight with bosses that will contextually reposition themselves get points in my book, and Sheo uses this to astounding effect, as each of his attacks have a unique pattern of paint globules that are sent flying. Having the boss move around in such a way that he maximizes the efficacy of his own attacks based on your positioning is just so great, and the fight has the exact atmosphere you'd expect while fighting the kindly yet stern Paintmaster. This fight has, in my opinion, one major issue, and that's Sheo's HP. For the point of the game you fight him in, Sheo's health is far too low for a one-on-one duel. In the Pantheons, his HP is only slightly higher than that of Oro in the first phase of the Nailmaster duel, and that whole section is meant to be an introduction to the Oro and Mato mechanics. It's super sad to see people slash and damage boost through this fight because there's so much great stuff here. The Ascended version of the fight remedies this somewhat by increasing Sheo's HP by a decent amount, but I still wish there were more fight here, because what is here is just so damn good. Number 8. The Radiance. Difficulty 4. Fun factor 4. Coming in at the number 8 spot is the original final boss of Hollow Knight, the Radiance. This fight is in every way a less intense fight than the one in Godhome. Her attacks are slower, some attacks have fewer waves or track the player less harshly, and the final phase of Absolute Radiance is completely missing as the fight ends with a single nail strike after the climb. I would be lying if I said I enjoyed this fight more than the Absolute Radiance, because as it stands, the buff version is just what I'm used to. Fighting the downgraded version after hours of training myself on Abstrad just for that sweet Radiant completion is just somewhat underwhelming. However, the battle is still epic and is a great way to round out the story, and has the very notable bonus of being much more accessible.
Sure, you may need to rematch the Hollow Knight every time you want a shot at the boss in the credits, but it's a hell of a lot more manageable than Pantheon 5. Remember when you thought reaching Soulmaster after a death was bad? Yeah. The lower barrier of entry and lower HP make this foe less frustrating and victory a lot more realistic, and the shorter fight manages to maintain all the same high points as the Absolute variant, while also removing some of the lows and the slog of a drawn-out battle. I mean, I don't think anyone is really missing that Phase 6. The fight ending after the climb is perfectly acceptable, and this fight trades some difficulty and overly intense atmosphere for a much more reasonable win con without removing mechanics that would make the boss anything but a fantastic finale to this masterpiece. Number 7, Failed Champion. Difficulty 4. Fun factor 4. Hey, remember how False Knight's at the bottom of this list for being an introductory boss without too many mechanics and being quite a pushover? Yeah? Well, here's Team Cherry expertly showing you how to turn one of the most boring bosses into the most brutal of brawls. 0 new attacks are added to this version of the fight, but everything else is turned up to 11. The bulky behemoth now zips across the screen with blinding speed that should be illegal and is no longer in the mood to telegraph his mace swings for eternity. What is left is a hyperspeed David vs. Goliath fight in which your enemy has much greater speed and reach, sending huge shockwaves at you and making barrels fall from the ceiling constantly, forcing you to divert your attention away from the malicious mace that will make you cry. Oh, and his damage has been doubled too. This bout makes brilliant use of the Shade Cloak and the Monarch Wings as you act on pure instinct knowing the False Knight's attacks. All the while, you'll be wondering, how the heck did this guy get so hard? Or rather, you would be thinking that if you had time to think. Something to chew on during your death animation, I suppose. Hitting the armor also does not give soul, meaning the resource will be quite limited throughout the fight and you'll need to use each cast to full effect. One tip I would offer the uninitiated that have trouble with this fight in the boss rushes is that when the boss staggers, you can Dream Nail him for soul and then bounce on his armor to reset the stagger timer. This way you can safely stock up on health and soul between each phase of the fight, making things a lot more manageable. This is certainly one of the hardest battles in the game and one that shows no signs of becoming boring just due to how fast each run ends up being. And seriously, how did Team Cherry turn the piddly False Knight into this nightmare? Number 6, the Hollow Knight. Difficulty 3. Fun factor 4. The game's namesake finally makes his appearance. In my previous top 10, the Hollow Knight did not make it anywhere on the list because I had too recently been burned out on having to fight him again and again every time I wanted to attempt the Radiance. I have regretted that decision for so long, so it's finally time for me to make things right. The Hollow Knight is neither the most mechanically difficult nor the most interesting boss. In fact, if you only come at him after beating most or all of the game first, he's very much a pushover. But the Hollow Knight has a hidden depth to him as a challenge run boss. I never truly appreciated how well this boss was designed until doing speedruns and low percent runs of this game. It's what he was made for. Coming into this fight underprepared makes you acknowledge and appreciate every aspect of this battle, because he can be quite hard and takes a while to beat. It starts as a basic duel. THK can either lunge at you, parry, or perform a triple slash. As the fight continues, he begins to add in a jump slam, with double damage pillars of infection bursting from the ground. All the while, his body takes more physical damage, and the infection begins to take control, spewing itself from his chest. The fight continues as the infection carries him around like a puppet, hanging him from midair and spewing in every direction, or throwing him across the arena like a ragdoll in an attempt to squash the player. But the Hollow Knight, he's fighting back now. As the music swells in a deeply emotional chord, he stabs himself over and over to purge himself of the Radiance. As he is nearing death, THK loses all his other attacks and gets thrown around the arena over and over. Occasionally, he will step up and attempt a triple slash, but immediately falls to his knees in agony. The impure vessel is doing everything he can to fight back against the Radiance. He knows his purpose, and he knows why he has failed. As the ultimate crescendo begins, and the Hollow Knight falls to his knees, you, his sibling, take on the burden he has carried for so long. The infection seeps out of his cracked head and into yours, as the music rises, and stops. The fight is, well, brilliant. It's art. The sealed vessel track and every single action in this fight is used with the sole purpose of telling the story of two siblings transferring the burden of Hallownest perpetuation in such a deeply emotional manner. This scene absolutely nails, no pun intended, the concept of show, don't tell, with the narrative being so masterfully interwoven into the fight's gameplay. This is the kind of thing that sticks with you, and it can honestly bring you to tears if you're an emotional sack like myself. This fight provides enough difficulty gameplay-wise for challenge runs that I can't and won't dock points,
and you would be hard-pressed to find another battle nearly as emotional as this one, making it one I will never forget in all my years of gaming. Number 5. Great Nailsage Sly. Difficulty 4. Fun factor 5. I'll admit it, I'm a real sucker for one-on-one duel scenarios. Whether it be Lost Kin, Hornet, Paintmaster Sheo, or any of the other nail-to-nail clashes, I'm a big fan. And Great Nailsage Sly? He might be the best of them all. Finally getting a chance to cross weapons with the diminutive Nailsage turned shopkeep himself is something I knew I needed ever since his backstory was revealed to me. Sly speaks softly and carries a large nail, which means that you'll need to keep track of how close you can get to the Mighty Might to reach his hitbox while simultaneously staying safely outside his enormous damage boxes, which cover far more of the screen than should be legal. Sly is also another instance of a context-sensitive boss, meaning he'll adapt his movements based on your current location. However, with Sly this goes a lot deeper than just a backwards dodge roll. Many of Sly's moves combo into one another, and he won't perform certain parts of attacks unless you are within a specified range. What ensues is the best dueling mechanic in Hollow Knight, with you constantly weaving in and out of Sly's nail range to bait out attacks in order to punish him while he does the same to you. The Nailsage may perform a double slash forwards, with both attacks covering the entirety of his hitbox. If you happen to be close enough at the end of the attack, he'll immediately follow up with a jumping saw blade attack. Unlike most bosses, he can also switch directions halfway through this attack, meaning that just because you've dashed over or through Sly does not mean you're safe. Much like his pupils, Sly also has a jump and nail slime attack, which he may follow up with a secondary overhead swipe depending on the knight's positioning. Finally, Sly will run around the arena as he sees fit in order to close distance between you, or jump back into the corner of the room to perform the dash slash. Yeah, that's right, Sly also has access to all three of the nail arts, and unlike his students, can charge up the moves much faster. All three of the moves have slight differences from how Mato, Oro, and Sheo perform them, and it's a very nice touch to see how the masters ended up mimicking the sage's battle style. After dealing enough damage to the diminutive Doyen, he'll jump into the air and start bouncing off the walls like he snorted a whole entire cocaine. After every few jumps, Sly will dash towards you and turn himself into a saw blade, which is relatively easy to dodge but will perform deep psychological damage to the player. This phase is simple but can be overwhelming if you aren't prepared for it. Just stand in the center of the arena and take it slow. When you see Sly making a beeline for you, get out of the way and hit back right as the attack ends. He should go down pretty quick after a few rounds of hits. This fight is honestly perfect. Sly's long range and tiny hitbox make it very hard to cheese, and his reactionary movements make the fight feel alive in a way that so few bosses do. This is a really great battle and would easily blow any other boss list out of the water, but of course, Hollow Knight manages to have even better fights. It's nuts! Number 4. Grey Prince Zote. Difficulty 4. Fun factor 5. Man, I bet you're wishing you left Zote to die back in Green Path, aren't you? I wouldn't blame you, as the invincible, fearless, sensual, mysterious, enchanting, vigorous, diligent, overwhelming, gorgeous, passionate, terrifying, beautiful, powerful grey buffoon can be a wickedly difficult foe. For the entire adventure, you've been saving this grumbly and wholly unappreciative codger from death's door time and time again, finally getting your chance to deliver comeuppance in the trial of the warrior. After returning to Dirtmouth, you'll find that Bretta, the girl you saved in the Fungal Wastes, has completely forgotten about you and is now fangirling at this blowhard's baseless battle tales. Entering Bretta's basement will reveal that the obsession has taken maybe a few steps past healthy into utterly nutty, as she now worships a statue of the Grey Prince, the version of Zote she imagines in her dreams. And this guy is, well, he's really annoying. Ironically, the Grey Prince is no better at fighting than Zote himself, as he'll run around the arena flailing his nail, trip on his own feet, and jump around, sometimes directly through the floor and onto your face. The danger behind this fight is that Zote has become so powerful in Bretta's dreams that even his stupid mistakes generate giant shockwaves in every direction. He'll even spit out versions of himself that either hop or fly towards you, or explode after a few seconds, another instance of great ads that enhance the experience. This fight is so frustratingly funny as you desperately try and match nail strikes with a wholly talentless blob who has enough power to end you by simply falling over. It's a damn hard fight too, as most of the attacks have variations that have almost no tell. Is he getting ready to run around flailing Life Ender? Nope, he immediately falls over and generates shockwaves. Coming down on you from above? Oh, he did an extra little pirouette in the air to adjust his positioning. Coming down for a big slam? He'll sometimes go right through the floor and fall down from the ceiling on his stupid dumb ass. These tiny variations are almost impossible to predict and result in an almost completely reaction time based boss, as though it has minimal patterns to learn. Everything you do has to be done on the fly, as anticipating an attack from the undisciplined dud is a dangerous game. What results is an incredible fight against an unlikely threat that tests your ability to think on your feet rather than read the room, and it manages to be utterly gut-busting throughout. Number 3, Nightmare King Grimm. Difficulty 5. Fun factor 5. Starting off the top 3 is the Nightmare King himself. This version of the Grimm fight takes things up to the next level, as Grimm keeps his large swath of attacks and now moves fast enough to give you 0 downtime. Alongside each attack having a much quicker startup animation, the uppercut now bursts into more flames, the dive and dash leaves a damaging trail of fire behind, and the fire bat attack now spawns 4 bats instead of 3 in an alternating top and bottom pattern. Getting too close to the Nightmare King before he can finish this attack will lead him to teleport away and throw out 2 extra bats at the top and bottom of the range. The Spikes attack now becomes dangerous much more quickly, and Grimm gains the good sense to completely disappear from the arena and not leave himself open to attack. Finally, the big bad gets 1 new attack which starts from an airborne position. If Grimm teleports midair with his cloak billowing, he'll spawn 4 pillars of flame one after another, tracking your location, and have a damage box that persists after the pillar fades. The best way to tackle this boss is to find 1 or 2 attacks that you feel comfortable counterattacking during, and focus only on getting hits in during those segments. With the non-stop aggression that NKG lays down as well as the double damage, it's very important to stay in the rhythm of this fight and not lose your cool. Sharp Shadow is a really helpful charm here, as the extra dash length can keep you safe during several attacks, and dashing through Grimm really adds up the damage. Much like the Troupe Master, he'll skitter back when needed and unleash the Flame Spawner attack at 75, 50, and 25% health. It is very hard to succeed in this fight without learning Grimm's dance, falling into the rhythm with the cadence of his attacks, and it works at both a gameplay and lore level. Each step Grimm takes has a counter step that keeps you safe and leaves him open for a hit, and it's up to the player to figure out and decide which of these chances they're comfortable taking. What results is a thrilling tango as you meet each of Grimm's moves with your own, slowly getting through the fight. When you see him puff into a balloon, the pressure has never been higher. Without any extra phases or attacks being added throughout the battle, you know each time you see the Flame Spitter that you're 1 step closer to defeating your foe. Your nightmare heart will be racing every time, guaranteed. Number 2, Sisters of Battle. Difficulty 3. Fun factor 5. And here it is, the fight that everyone has been waiting for since their introduction to the Mantis Lords. Everything I praised about the original fight is still true here, although since this one won't be occurring in the natural storyline, it doesn't need to be as accessible. Regardless, it still is, since the Mantises are very simple foes. So if you've beaten 2 of them, you can beat 3. For this reason, the fight really isn't all that hard, but it doesn't matter because it's still damn fun. You'll be hard-pressed to find a fight that makes you feel like more of a badass than when you perform each movement perfectly for the chaotic minute or 2 that this battle ensues. Adding a 3rd Lord to the mix not only increases the tempo at which you dodge attacks and adds a 3rd health bar that you need to knock through, but the added Lord will also perform a slam attack while the other 2 throw their boomerangs, which keeps the excitement coming, whereas that is normally a pretty slow attack in the original fight. There's absolutely no time to heal in this fight, but everything is so quick and precise that the odds never feel stacked against you. The player feels like they've been given all the tools to succeed and simply need to survive the chaotic clash for long enough to gain the chance for respite. There's never a dull moment while the triage of threats is bearing down on you, which very likely makes this the most fun fight in the game, bar none. Without any chance to divert your attention, this battle brings with it one long and pure rush of adrenaline that doesn't end until one of the lords goes down. And that's where this fight kinda falls apart. Once one of the Mantises gets taken down, the fight starts feeling a bit disjointed as the speed decreases drastically. With the 2 remaining Mantises not returning to the old version of the duo boomerang throw, there can sometimes be awkwardly long pauses during attacks after one of the lords gets taken out, and it's somewhat jarring. It's unfortunate that the pacing of the fight gets wonky at this point because otherwise it's a perfect battle. Granted, taking out one lord at a time does give you a visible progression I usually like from bosses, but in this case the boss just starts getting easier instead of getting harder as you deal more damage, which feels odd, especially since unlike the Mantis Lords fight, the damage you're dealing to each lord has the potential to be very uneven, making the 2nd and 3rd phases of the fight take way longer than they should. Also, while I understand the reason for starting out with a single Mantis in the same way as the original fight, and having all 3 of them stand up at once and shout is a super cool reveal, I feel like that at this point in the game the player doesn't really need the introductory phase or the warm-up. But I'm not too fussed about it, the fight just takes a little bit to really get going, in sort of an Oro and Mato manner. I think this battle would have potentially had better pacing overall if the 3 Mantises shared one large health bar, and once it was depleted, each hit would be a killing blow on that Mantis. Sure, it would remove the positive feedback loop of the fight, but I also think it would be a lot more gratifying to have a longer phase of pure intensity and end it off with 3 rapid-fire killing blows to end the battle, rather than the awkward cooldown phase where you stand and wonder where all the hype went. Either way, this is still a godlike battle, and I love it dearly despite it being rather easy compared to many of the foes at the top of this list. Number 1. Pure Vessel. Difficulty 5. Fun factor 5. Hitting the number 1 spot as my favorite boss in my favorite game, full of my favorite bosses, comes the one and only Pure Vessel. This boss just has everything going for it. This duel rivals Nightmare King Grimm for being the second hardest fight in the game after Absolute Radiance, and the smooth and sleek animations make moving around the battlefield and dodging his attacks as satisfying as weaving through the Sisters of Battle. And don't get me started on the lore. The callback to No Voice to Cry Suffering line with the pre-battle silent boss scream gives me literal chills. While it's not technically in the game, I do also want to make note of Pv's cut Dreamnail dialogue, which includes lines like do not think, do not speak, and do not hope. I know that since the lines were cut, they're technically not canon, but they fit in perfectly with the lore we see at the end of the Path of Pain and in the Black Egg Temple, with the vessel being tarnished by an idea instilled. The poor guy just wanted to make his dad proud and ended up bringing the whole kingdom down because of it. As expected, the Pure Vessel is the Hollow Knight in his prime, which means he's got a lot of the same moves but is much more efficient. Instead of bursting with infection, PV shoots out a wave of white daggers. He can also teleport into the air and slam down to bring forth giant swords reminiscent of the infection pillars in the original fight. And of course, much deadlier versions of the triple slash, lunge, and parry are also here alongside 3 separate movement options, a jump, a backstep, and a teleport. This guy really does have it all. Much like with Sly and the other high-tier duels, the battle feels alive as the Pure Vessel adjusts to your movement and positioning rather than just throwing out attacks at random and forcing you to play to their tempo. Every movement feels important, every step vital as you throw down once more with your sibling. The fight is still emotional, but in a very different way from the Hollow Knight. The battle is still telling a story, but rather than it being a cry for help, it's the tale of your big brother kicking your ass. It's phenomenal. There's just so much weight to every aspect of the atmosphere, and it all comes together so perfectly. As is standard for bosses I love, the battle gets increasingly more intense while offering you that proof of progression. Once PV hits 50% health, he'll start focusing up, creating a giant orb around him that fills with soul energy and damages anything inside after a short windup. The map will then fill up with 6 smaller circles that will also explode with soul energy after a short delay. This attack works both in forcing you to play the distance game for a short time while also diverting your attention across the map for a second so you can get yourself out of harm's way from the smaller orbs. Finally, once reaching a quarter of his health, PV will start using the void inside of him to lash out at you from across the map. This is actually a really smart design choice from Team Cherry, as players who have been shade dashing through the boss up until this point, which is otherwise a viable strategy, will need to quickly recognize and reassess that their not being in the air is going to lead to pain. Every aspect of this fight, the lore implications, the heavy atmosphere, the incredibly well implemented attack and spacing patterns, the difficulty, it all comes together in a manner that I can do nothing but vehemently respect Team Cherry for creating. But, of course, this is all just my long-winded thoughts and opinions on the 46-strong armada of bosses in Hollow Knight. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below on why you think a boss is better or worse than where I placed it, and I'd like to finish up by saying that pretty much every fight in this game is still very well made. Just because your favorite ended up in the high 30s doesn't mean I'm saying I think the boss isn't good by any stretch of the imagination, it just means that Hollow Knight is filled to the brim with top-notch battles. And if you're still here after not having played the game, I am once again going to highly recommend that you go do so. If you enjoyed my ranting and raving, consider hitting the like and subscribe buttons, and click around the screen here and here for some more other Hollow Knight content I've created. I've been Technovoid, and I'm gonna go back to my corner staring at the wall while I wait for more Silksong news. So long.